heavily timbered country of the southwest presented clearing difficulties. Sturdy jarrah, wandoo and marri trees had to be felled. This heavy steel highball, chained to two super tractors of 185 horsepower, designed for heavy work, was the answer. Nothing is left standing, and limbs are smashed and torn off, leaving a good medium for fire.
And I would suggest to you that in this, the second century of our occupation of Australia, we are celebrating its destruction and desertification. And what we should be doing, instead of going in for all these idiotic things like camel races and motor races and lighting beacons and firing crackers, we should be out there restoring the environment that we have destroyed.
When I went up and had a look at what was happening, I was appalled. And I started writing letters, and there were only 4 or 5 other people that used to write letters, and I used to think to myself, are we the only handful of people in the whole of Western Australia that are concerned that our forests are being literally destroyed? That was 20 years ago. Today our natural environments are still being overused, misused and abused. But it's the greatest inspiration to me in my old age to see more and more people taking responsibility and making their concern heard. These people embarked on a 3-week journey called the Great Walk through the remnants of Western Australia's southern forest to see for themselves what was happening.
I feel pretty hopeless trying to face Parliament as an individual and get things done. That's why I believe if we can mobilise people and say, look, we've had 120 people move through the forest at different stages.
For 650 kilometres.
For 650 kilometres. We've achieved something. That's incredible, you know.
The condition of the environment in Western Australia is directly linked to the way we use natural resources. We have 2 options: earn revenue by employing people and their imaginations to make from reduced quantities of these raw resources something more valuable to sell, or extract and chop down huge quantities of them to sell unprocessed. We have traditionally taken the second option. This large-scale consumption is the easy option, which puts short-term profits into the pockets of the present generation by literally taking the skin off the Earth's back.
Year after year after year, you chop this body of Australia and you sell it. You sell an eye, you sell, you know, a kidney. You know, it's a question of time, and then you will have nothing to sell. Okay? And what will be left is this empty landscape, this empty skeleton.
Well, Perth is the major city for Western Australia. We have 70% of our population here, and they're concentrated into a relatively small area. And this one big city is much more dependent on external resources than any major city in Australia. Our per capita consumption of water is greater than any other city in Australia. And we're much more dependent on the motor car transport than any other city, and most of our cities are more dependent than others in the world.
When I go to the city, I feel that many people are living in an unreal kind of a world. I'm always struck when I visit Perth by its beauty and its prosperity. But I feel that the prosperity that most people are enjoying is a prosperity which is based on the resources of the land, which have been developed in a destructive way over 150 years or so, and is non-sustainable.
Well, in the process of preparing this state conservation strategy, we had to review the state of the environment right across Western Australia. The overall conclusion that I was forced to come to was that, firstly, we've got a very fragile environment. It's a very harsh environment, very fragile. We've got a wonderful array of fauna and flora that's well adapted to it, but they're operating close to their threshold. About 90% of our pastoral lands requires attention. Some 65% of the 17 million hectares cleared for agriculture are now regarded as unstable. 36% of our surface water in the southwest is now too saline to be used by humans, or by wildlife, by the way.
Way back in the early 1920s, Sir James Mitchell launched a great scheme of clearing the wheat belt. Sir James entertained the idea, quite fallacious, that the rain would follow the plough. So they brought out a large number of southern Europeans and set them felling the forest between northeast and southeast of Northern, the area in which the Avon River and its tributaries rise. Within 4 years of them initiating that program, the tributaries were salt. Within 6 years, the Avon was too salt for the railway department to use any longer for replenishment of their engine supplies.
Australian farming is, in a sense, mining the topsoil. Every time you have a harvest, you lose in something like, in the Esperance region, you lose 1 ton of topsoil per acre. There is a certain limit to how many years you can have wheat or barley in one, paddock. Because, it's in 50 years' time, if you keep doing it, you can't do it anymore. It's very hard to convince a farmer who is in wheat and sheep farming to change. It's very hard. But if that farm is on the wall, then the farmer will say, hey, this is crazy. Not only I have to spend all these hours on a tractor eating dust, but I'm not even making money.
Well, the only way that I could remain farming was to either make the existing enterprise more efficient or to look at alternative resources that I had on the land. And that's where I started to look at the water and the volume of water that was here.
Ron Watkins is moving away from the traditional farming methods which were destroying his farm and is building a new system based on harnessing water that previously caused waterlogging, salinity and erosion. The series of drains and dams he is building will furnish enough water to make viable a whole range of alternatives potentially more valuable and less damaging to the land than wheat and sheep.
And so I guess it's the environment that I'm reacting to and saying, now look, the current advice that we may be getting, and the environment's telling us that there's something else needs to be done. We need to be developing farming systems that are long-term and stable. But so much of our research work is dealt with short-term work, and the development that I'm doing here is much longer term.
It has been said that the same confidence and short-sightedness that saw the wholesale clearing of the wheat belt is being applied in our forests today with the burning regimes and clear felling that are turning our remaining forests into wood farms. Western Australia originally had a mere 5% of its area forested. Clearing reduced this to just 1%. Half of the Karri, Marri and Jarrah forest has been lost, and 13% of the remnant Jarrah is infected with the killer dieback fungus. Today, it is very difficult to see what a virgin Jarrah forest looks like. And as I remember it, there were the crowns of the Jarrah forest, the Jarrah trees were full and well covered in foliage. But I flew over it a few years ago, and it looked like looking down on the back of a mangy dog, and there's no other way to describe it. It's absolutely appalling.
We're seeing trees, youngish trees, dying through no apparent causes this summer, still quite well foliated, and this is not in a dieback situation. These are trees that are simply not getting enough water and are keeling over. So that we are teetering on this threshold, so that as soon as the greenhouse effect intensifies, these pressures are going to show even more greatly.
We're told don't worry about it, it's going to regrow, but it's becoming clear that the forest and the trees are not regrowing in these areas that they're cutting them down in like this. They're not regrowing to what they forecast. In other words, the amount of wood they're growing is not happening because the rainfall is disappearing. And it's time that we stopped and took stock of the situation before we go too far.
Along with the forests of the southwest have gone the plants and animals. 42 plant species are classified as extinct, and 853 listed as rare or threatened. Still, only 1/3 of our threatened plants are protected in reserves. In the wheat belt, 60% of medium-sized mammals have disappeared.
They have lasted years ago. You'd see them all in little squares, in clumps, of different colours. Donkey orchids, spider orchids of all sorts. Any wild flower you'd like to mention, you'd see it in the bush. But there'll be hardly a dandelion here soon, the way things are going. One time ago here, the blackfellow that lived off this country here, they had certain blocked places. Each blackfellow had a certain run of country where he'd go and get his own possums if he wanted to live off it. Another fellow have his own place. But now you can't see one possum around. You could hardly jump to see a possum around the place. I'd jump to see a mokepoke at night time. I'd jump to hear him making a noise. The real wild birds. You might hear one or two foxes shouting at night. That's all here.
Plants and seeds.
The one process ongoing in the 1980s that will take, believe it or not, millions of years to correct, is the loss of genetic and species diversity by the destruction of natural habitats. This is the curse we inflict on future generations, which they can never forgive. But when I go and sit in a virgin Karri forest and see these massive great columns rearing themselves to the sky up to 200 feet or more high, it's like it produces a real cathedral atmosphere, and I think the first human architects, they were inspired by that sort of a site that gave them the idea of building tall cathedrals. And there's always something happening around you. Keep very quiet. It's in the summer, there's little fan-tailed birds, they come along and they pick flies off your hat.
There seems to be no middle ground whereby we're actually looking at areas for economic development which are non-destructive, which bring to them all the insight of the environment movement, of needing to nurture the earth and to be non-destructive, but which also bring to them the basic insights of economic development, because we all rely on resources. And that brings me back to trees again, because of course trees are incredibly productive items. You know, trees can produce for us so many raw materials, timber, fodder, fruit, nut, so many things that we use in daily life can be produced in that non-destructive way.
It seemed evident to me during the days of being an environmental campaigner that there were solutions and that they would benefit just about everybody, but there was just an incredible amount of resistance to change, and there seemed to be so many things that the government ought to be doing. And, you know, we just found that by actually going into business, provided a vehicle of being able to get on with projects and not having, therefore, to try and do it through the government and fit in with government policies and change government policies and overcome bureaucratic inertias and things like that. Every time I get depressed, I come down here and feel better again.
Those corkscrews are nice, quite a lot of foliage.
Now, I'm not saying stop all growth. I'm saying let's think very carefully at each proposal for growth in the future and choose forms of growth which are less energy consuming. And let's not squander our resources, not only our energy resources, but our water resources and all other resources, because we do live beyond our means and waste a lot of them.
Although this looks pretty cracked on the end, if we cut a piece off, it can be seen that this is very good solid wood here, and although it's got a couple of faults on the side, all of this wood could be used. Even very short lengths, it could be sawn wide and produce excellent quality furniture material. And there's just dozens of examples of this type of thing through the Jarrah coops. I've been building this machine, which is a horizontal bandsaw, for the last 6 months now, and initially I started building this machine to make use of a resource out in the forest which we looked at earlier. This machine will be capable of cutting wide boards from these short logs. Basically, the department has always said that short logs are not millable and that there's no market for them. And I was really taking up the challenge from the department to show that firstly, short logs are millable, and secondly, that there could be a demand for them if the right pricing structure was in place, and thirdly, that I can produce a product from these short logs that are now considered to be waste.
If the Department of Conservation and Land Management was prepared to reform the system, which allows this criminal waste of millions of tonnes of Jarrah each year, then less of our precious forest would need to be sacrificed. Today, this squandering continues.
I mean, they've got unemployed people and they've got a resource sitting here. And all it needs is the departments to start to be realistic about it. They can soon start something.
I feel that basically politicians are out of touch with these major questions, environmental questions facing us. Either they're out of touch or it suits them better to ignore them because they are so major that it's very difficult within the conceptual framework that they're using to address them seriously, so that they become just something that one gives lip service to.
We spent more than a year compiling a report which we tabled with the South West Development Authority in May 1986. There was a lot of time, effort and energy and expense went into this, and it did a lot of things to identify problems that existed with our current forest practices, the not the least of which was direct evidence that we were chipping millable timber. Now, it was a unanimous committee decision on that issue that an independent person be placed at the chip mill at all times
to ensure that this ceased. We were given the assurances by the South West Development Authority Advisory Committee that this action would be taken. This was May '86. To date, no action has been taken.
This single facility has contracts to load out $200 million worth of wood chips to Japan over 15 years. A very impressive export industry. Even more impressive is the fact that what they're actually exporting is a timber residue, something that would normally be burned.
It's timber of this type that comes to the wood chip plant at Manjimup. Every log here is totally unfit for any other timber purpose. The hearts of the trunks are split, or they have ring shakes, perhaps big gum pockets. Mostly they're marri trees, or red gums as you might call them.
This timber lobby promotional film will not show you the good carry saw logs that are constantly being chipped by the Bunnings-owned Western Australian Chip and Pulp. The direct evidence of this was gained in a milling trial in 1986 when several carry logs were taken from the chip mill landing and sawn into marketable timber.
The danger of a long tradition of resource extraction production is that it's difficult to change when you should, and that the winners in those games have built up authority and position within the economy or within the society, and when pressure comes to bear on them to change their activities, it's very hard to get them to do that.
There also must be the awareness that it is the Forest Products Association and the Timber Lobby which has the bucks to do the advertising to formulate the public opinion. It's definitely not other bodies. So they have the power, therefore, to bias public opinion. The small voice really rarely gets heard.
A case in point is the road, river and stream reserves. We know for a fact that they are going to log road, river and stream reserves. Now, we're being softened up for it. The CALM did some trial logging in road, river and stream reserves. The EPA is now considering it. So we're going to, in a short time, the government's going to come out and say it's fine to log in road, river and stream reserves. There will be there'll be no environmental damage, or the only acceptable environmental damage. The real reason is that they're doing it to maintain Bunnings' profits.
Just 1 month after being interviewed, Dr. Schultz's prediction sadly came true.
The most recent plan to upset conservationists and residents is Conservation and Land Management's decision to cut down trees in the road, river and stream reserves. Areas of forest previously set aside to make the drive into Pemberton resemble some sort of paradise.
This is exactly what the argument's about. Selective logging has already taken place here, and as you can see on this side of the road, the forest remains relatively untouched. But over here, the large trees have already been cleared, not only leaving a hole in the scenery, but putting an entire ecological process in jeopardy.
And I can't understand why it is happening. We're in the hands of the government, and we just have to hope that the government will come to its senses and do something.
26 days after setting out from Denmark, the Great Walk arrived in Perth. It carried with it a charter of proposals outlining urgent actions and reforms needed to combat the continuing degradation of our farmlands and forests. Hundreds of city supporters joined in to deliver this charter to the Premier, Peter Dowding.
There are little people here, there and everywhere who have a much clearer idea than our political leaders what the problems are and what is needed to be done to begin to tackle them. And I feel that slowly this will percolate through and we will be able to change our society in that way from the bottom.
It's absolutely essential. The first thing is to build up the understanding and awareness, and the way to do this is for free discussions right through the community. This was one of the things that I was anxious to do after preparing the State Conservation Strategy.
In 1987, the West Australian Minister for Environment, Barry Hodge, decided that the full report prepared by Dr. Chittleborough for the government would not be publicly released. Dr. Chittleborough's final reward was to be removed from the Environmental Protection Authority altogether. While there was no question about the accuracy of his assessment of the environment, it was his conclusion that real solutions lay in changing course from a consumer to a conservor society that led the mining industry faction lobbying for his dismissal to say he was, quote, a threat to the very fabric of our society. In my 46 years with the Forest Department, I witnessed time and again this kind of irresponsibility by government which betrays the public by failing to act on many facts that challenge the vested interests of big business.
But to my delight, the community itself, various groups throughout the Southwest have invited me along to talk about the problems, and I'm aware that the people themselves nowadays do want to understand what's going on, and that's extremely encouraging, and it's something that I see as the one big hope for us to get on and get something changed in a time frame that will work. If we leave it another decade, then the debt will be so high I don't see how we're going to crawl out of it.
We do not inherit the earth from our parents, rather we borrow it from our children.